Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session, the last one for the high school job support program for the time being. And today we're going to cover interview skills for casual jobs. Really important to understand how to nail an interview, especially if you've never done one before. What are they looking for? How do I answer correctly? So joined as always, we're joined by Eleanor, who's going to take us through today's session. If you do have questions as we go through, please type them in the chat or the Q&A function, and we will get to them as we go through today's content. Well, that's all from me, Eleanor. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you all for coming today. First, we'd like to acknowledge this land where we're recording from today is the traditional lands of the Ghana people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Ghana people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the Ghana people today. So welcome everyone. We are both joining you today, Sarah Parrington from Study Adelaide, and I, Eleanor Mahler from Time Makers Consulting, where we look at ways in which we can help students, international students and migrants succeed in the Australian workplace. So what we have planned for today is to first have a look at working in Australia and fair work. What does that mean and where to go to check if specific terms or employment terms are legal and done properly. So it's really important that you know where to look and where to compare if things are correct. Secondly, I'm giving you some interview intel. So for any interview or job interview that you participate in, there's always things that the employer is looking for. And once you know what they're trying to measure or ascertain from their candidates, that can really help you in your preparation and as you behave in that interview. Then we look specifically at interview questions and how to answer those. We look at group interviews, which is fairly common in casual and part-time jobs, particularly in industries or companies that require a large number of staff to be hired and start around the same time. So we have end of year, so Christmas and holidays coming up. Lots of businesses will be hiring probably from late October to cover those few weeks where it's going to be really, really busy, particularly in retail, hospitality and food production and food selling as well, like either in a supermarket or in different hotels and restaurants as well. And then we're going to give you some very practical tips about what you can do to prepare for an interview. Firstly, the piece about working in Australia, and that's going to be really concise. I mean, there's a lot of legislation surrounding workplace relations, but I will not share those with you because you don't need to know them now. However, once you have a job offer, this means once a company decides to offer you a position or a job with their company, with the organization, it's then important that you have a look at these websites. So that, as you can see, it's fairwork.gov.au. There is a national agency, a national website, and there's information that's relevant to all of Australia in all states and territories. And once you first get into this website, you'll see this exact page. I did a screenshot of it. That's just asking, what can we help you with? So this is where you're going to check, okay, you have a job offer where it tells you how many hours and how much they're going to pay you per hour. Then you check against pay to see if the amount that they're offering you is aligned according to your age, but also according to the type of job that you'll be doing. If for some reason you want to leave your employment afterwards, after you've been there for a while, whatever happens, you need to focus more on your studies, whatever it is, and you need some information about how you can end employment and what you need to tell your employer, again, you go to ending employment, click there and see what they recommend. Employee entitlements as well, meaning what they should not just be paying you, but any leave or any other benefits that the employer needs to be given you. And that all should be written in your contract of employment or letter of offer. So when an employer decides to hire you, they will give some documentation for you to read through and sign. If I were you, I would always be checking the information against this website, which is the official law regarding how employees are to be treated, paid, and which benefits people have access to. So it's very important that you check that. And I still use this website, even though I've been, working in Australia for 15, 16 years now. It's a very useful, and it's always updated as well, which means that if the law and legislation changes, you can rest assured that this website will be changed as well and have the latest information to help you know what's correct and what's not. We, Sarah and I, unfortunately hear quite terrible stories about students being underpaid. That's actually called wage theft. And there's been recently a large investigation on that by the government, because that's something that unfortunately still happens in Australia today. And we certainly don't want to be a victim of that, where people are paying you less than what they should. We in Australia have, amazing economic benefits and amazing, there's money, there's jobs, there's opportunities here, and it's just really sad when people are taken advantage of. So we bring this to your attention so that you can check any contractual arrangements that you received against what the law says. And then if everything is fine, sign and start your work, and we hope everything goes really well for you. But for example, I didn't know this when I first started, and I was being paid probably half of what I should have been, but I had no idea about any rights that I had as a worker. So we always like to bring these to the attention of students in particular, but also new migrants to Australia, because there is, you are entitled to rights as you work here in Australia. Cool. Curious, and we did ask the audience before we started recording if people had attended a job interview, and the students in the audience hadn't. So I think it's really timely that we talk about this today. Firstly, I want to give you some intelligence or intel into interviews. And this is, I think, the sooner we realize what employers are looking for and why they interview and what the criteria is, the easier it will be for any candidates to pass the interview and get a job offer. So there are three main measures or things that employers are looking for. The first one is the objective factor. So objective factor would be, for example, I own a bookshop and I want to hire someone to work on Saturdays and Sundays. I would like to have someone who enjoys books, obviously, and knows about different types of books. Let's say, particularly books about language learning, for example. Okay, so that's my criteria. Must be able to work on the weekends, must enjoy reading, and must know about language learning books. Three criteria. Objectively, once I have the list of people who would like to work there, I'll be looking at those three criteria. Who has got those three criteria, or at least two of those three that I want for that job? Okay, so that's a very objective way to get people for an interview. And that's normally what employers will use to invite candidates for an interview. Obviously, not all candidates can be interviewed. Some jobs you'd have 20 or 30 applicants. Not all of them are going to be interviewed. Probably only about 2 to 4 or 5 will get an interview. So the objective factor. When people come into the interview, it is assumed that they already have those three areas of expertise that I've asked for, or those three specific skills or attributes. So they're able to work Saturday, Sunday, they like books, and they enjoy or know about language learning books and authors. That's the objective. So the questions in that interview will relate to those 3 specific criteria that I asked for. And that's objective. Either you have that or you don't. Obviously, when people go to the interview, the assumption is that they do. So it's important that you prepare the examples of how you fulfill those 3 criteria in this example I've provided you. The second aspect that's being measured in a job interview relates to care factor, or how much you care about that company. So there could be some questions in there that or as the employer, I want to establish if you care enough about the business or about the industry to work there. Meaning, do you want to work for my bookshop, or do you just want any job? Because if you just want any job, or if you really don't care about my bookshop, you actually want to work in the coffee shop that's close by because you enjoy the coffee that they make there and you want to work there and your friend works there, then obviously, if you're working for me, but then the coffee shop opens a vacancy, you will leave my bookshop to go and work somewhere else. However, if you're really passionate about books, you walk past my bookshop every day and you go, oh, I wish I could work here. It could be that you get even a better offer, but you will not leave because you care deeply about the products and the company or that specific shop. So care factor is something that employers are going to measure. And how they do that will be by asking questions such as, what do you know about our company? Why do you want to work here? What are some of the things that motivate you? And in answering those questions, as the employer, I'll get a good picture of who you are as a person, what your preferences are, what your personality is like, to then be able to see if you really care about us and the industry and the products and the public that we serve, or if this is just a job for you. And the third aspect is the subjective one, which is where the employer is trying to answer in their own head, will this person work well with the group of employees that I already have? Will they be able to work really well with this team that are already working in this bookshop? And if I ascertain that objectively you fulfill the 3 requirements that I asked for, you care about the business and you really want to work here, and you will be a good fit, or you will work well with the rest of the team that are already having the shop, you are probably going to get a job offer out of that. So the candidate that best matches those 3 factors will get the job. And I'll just explain a bit further about that. So when we look at what's being measured, for example, in this job ad that I have here on the screen, it shows clearly the type of criteria that they have and what they're looking for. So the person that can demonstrate more of those, for example, as you can see here on the screen, we would be looking at enthusiastic individuals, versatile, responsive, just responsive when dealing with customer requests, and then some characteristics such as team player, strong work ethic, can-do attitude, high energy, lively personality, physically fit. Obviously, in this example, they want someone who's quite an extrovert from the information that we're getting here. That they also have willingness to learn, flexibility to work early mornings or late evenings throughout the week. Please note it doesn't talk about weekend in this specific case. So if someone went in there and they said, which days are you available to work? And the answer was, oh, I'm available weekends and public holidays, but not during the week, that person would not be offered the job. And they may well fulfill all the other requirements, but they said specifically on this job ad that they wanted early mornings or late evenings. So it could be something minor that ends up just drawing that opportunity to get a job. So that's something that obviously gets measured. Then, of course, we have the care factor, and I've brought a picture here of the National Wine Center because It is one of the employers that we currently have on Job Shop. And I actually went there, Sarah, last week on an event that they had there. And there was one student from Study Adelaide working there on the shift. So it was very nice to see that not only Study Adelaide and the Wine Centre, the National Wine Centre, have an agreement for, for students to be given that chance, but when we go there on a normal day, the students are actually there, which is amazing to see.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's been a fantastic initiative. And like you said, it's fantastic when you get to go there and the people you meet are like, oh, I got the job through the Study Adelaide Job Shop. Thank you so much. And you're like, oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's a nice feeling, that's for sure. So we cannot highlight, Sarah and I cannot highlight enough the success stories coming through Job Shop, but also that in looking for part-time casual jobs, your first point of contact, if it was me, should be Job Shop, because that does provide employers that are understanding of international students and are also willing to help train and are paying properly. So that should be your first point of call. So in this case, National Wine Centre, if someone went there, they would say, what do you know about the National Wine Centre? And that would be one of the interview questions. Or why do you want to work here with us and not at the other restaurant down the road? And you must have those answers ready, and they must be truthful, but they also need to show that you have researched what their business is about, what are the main attendees to their events, what types of events they have, just to show that you are interested in them and what they do. And the third one, as I mentioned, is about, are you going to be a good fit for the team? So here we have a photo of a team, and Drake's is also part of Job Shop. Here we have the photo of a team. This is outside of your control because you don't know who the team is, but they're trying to determine, as you answer your questions and as you behave during the interview, if you and the team are going to get on well and are going to really work well together as you do your job. Cool. Looking at interview questions now, I think the first thing to say to you is that there are 4 main types of interview questions, and they can be separated into these 4 categories. The first one is, and I'm saying out of order, so, just to see if you're paying attention. The first one that you're probably going to be asked are open-ended questions. So an open-ended question would be a question that can be answered in many different ways. For example, if I ask, what do you do on the weekend? That's an open-ended question. Or what brings you here today? That's an open-ended question. But if I asked you, do you like going to the zoo? That's not an open-ended question, because the answer can only be yes or no. So open-ended question, their objective, their intention is to have candidates explaining about themselves, speaking for a little while, so that then that company can ascertain their interest, the things that excite them, and who they are as a person and personality-wise as well. Then we have the technical questions. So depending on what the job is, there's going to be different things that the company will ask for. For example, in the example of the bookshop, or let's say if someone is applying for a job at McDonald's or other fast food companies or restaurants, a technical question could be, able to use a coffee machine, or able to what's the word, Sarah? You worked at McDonald's. They have some specific staff that stay on the booth just taking the
like drive-through,
yes,
drive-through operators and stuff. Yeah.
Yes. So there could be some requirements about people that can communicate well over the phone or over that, whatever that's called. It's not a phone, it's a radio almost type thing that people just talk to it. You hear, you put the the orders through, and then you talk to the person face to face to get the money or to give them their product that they purchased. So there could be some technical requirements, and they obviously vary in complexity and type according to what the job you're applying for is. Then we have the behavioral questions. And behavioral questions, and I'll go into a bit more detail on them, but they would ask you to give an example of something that has happened to you in the past. So for example, tell me about a time when you had a problem to resolve. What did you do? And I'm trying to ascertain or to learn more about your personality, how you go on about solving problems, etc. And then finally, we have the hypothetical questions, which could be anything. It could be like, if you were to go outer space, would you prefer to go to a warm or cold planet, and why? So it's like, well, it's unlikely that you go to outer space. So that's why it's a hypothetical question, but they're trying to guess or to see your thinking process, the logic behind your answers as well. Hypothetical questions are the least likely, so you shouldn't have too many of those in your interview or at all. It's very likely that employers will ask you more practical questions, but I'll go through those as well so that you know. These are the most common interview questions for casual and part-time interviews or jobs. So as you can see here, we have, when are you available to start? Very practical question. And you need to have the answer even before you go to the interview. Secondly, what's your weekly availability? Again, you better know even before you go to the interview what that is. What relevant experience do you have? And when we're talking here about relevant experience, it's very, very important that we relate it back, as we said last week, we relate it back to any volunteering, any co-curricular activities, any projects we've done, any sports, anything that we can use that is relevant to what that job is. So for example, if you are, I don't know, you are interested in getting a part-time job in the community radio, and you do that because you are involved with the radio that there was at school, for example, I don't know, you need to link things up that way. So you're saying, look, my experience is this, and it doesn't matter if your experience was not paid. That's absolutely fine to provide examples that were unpaid, because you're just showing your skill and how what you have done once you can do again. And that's what you're trying to provide real life examples of that. Number 4 would be, why do you want to work here? And again, just to say, because I need a job, it's not a good answer. It needs to be really personal about who they are, what they do, and what excites you about their company. So it could be, if it's a restaurant, you want to work there because you really enjoy the food, you like the nice environment that they provide to their customers. Maybe they are very well-reputed or a well-reputable restaurant. Maybe there was an article about them on the, on the newspaper, on the news, that was very positive. I don't know. You are the only person that can tell the employee why you want to work there. For sure, I would not work anywhere, and you would be the same, because all of us as humans, we have personal preferences and things that interest us more or less. So it's very important that even before you go to the interview, you think about, okay, why do I want to work here? Like, why do I care? And the last one is, what do you know about our business? So you don't need to know, all the detail about them. However, you need to know the minimum, again, to show that you care, because you're trying to show that. Sarah?
I would just add back to number 2 point about what's your weekly availability. I think this is feedback we've heard directly from the employers as well. It's around not just providing like 1 or 2 time slots in a week that you're available, because they won't consider you. For example, Speaking to McDonald's recently, they're receiving a number of applications from students who are saying, yes, I'm available between 4 and 9 p.m. on a Thursday. That doesn't mean anything to them because they need someone who's more reliable and has more availability and more flexibility than that. So it's about providing as much of your availability as possible, because you're not going to be working all those hours that you mentioned that you're available for. But it means when they're doing a roster, there's flexibility there for them to see how you would fit in their organization as well.
Definitely. And that's really good advice, Sarah. And that's actually very truthful as well, because that's the feedback from the employer themselves. Remember that if an employer hires anyone, they need to train that person. There's mandatory training. There is practical training. There are lots of forms that need to be filled out. There are introductions to the team. And there's a number of different actions that employers will need to do to ensure that you are well prepared to do the work that's required. Now, if someone is only able to do 5 hours a week, say, sometimes for their employer, it's not worthwhile. It's easier for them to give those 5 hours to one of their current employees than what it is to put me through the whole process, like 20, maybe more hours of training, for me to do 5 hours a week and maybe stay for 2 months, and then I find something else and I leave. So it's just not logical for them to do so. So that's a very good point, Sarah, that you make about weekly availability. I would even say if someone is only available like 5 hours a week, then they should probably be looking at the markets that we spoke about last week, because that's an event that happens once a week. People need help to pack up or sell or whatever it is. And then it's done. And that's 5 hours or 6 hours a week, 1 day a week, always the same day, always the same time. And that's done. But certainly with McDonald's being 24/7 and all of that, 5 hours a week probably doesn't help with covering shifts. It's not enough. So looking at open-ended questions that you could be asked, there is this very famous question that most companies will ask as a first question, and it is, tell us a bit about yourself. Now, for that question, they are trying to understand about you, your personality, your skills, and the job. Those things and how they relate to each other. So if I go in and it's a job at McDonald's, to use the recent example, and they say, tell me a bit about yourself. And I say, I'm Elena, and I've recently bought a dog, and I'm just so excited. He's very, very cute. It's not true, by the way. He's very, very cute. Do you want to see some pictures? Because, you know, Fido is just delightful. And that's about me. That answer does not help the employer know anything about my skills, know anything about why I applied, know anything about what's my interest in working for McDonald's at all. It would be better if I had said something like, well, I'm Elena. I'm currently studying year 12 at whichever school. I love food, and my family tells me that I eat too much, whatever. I would love to work in a fast food place. McDonald's is like, I remember the first time I came to McDonald's, I was 3. I never forgot that. I love all the chicken dishes. I know all the meals that you provide. And I live very close by, so I could cover shifts in short notice. So that would be about me, something like that. So it relates directly with the company, what you offer, why you're applying, etc. The next one that's open-ended. Oh, and by the way, most people, and these even Australian people that I've interviewed over the years, they don't prepare for this question. And then you ask this question, and it's always the first question, and people look surprised. So I'm telling you right now, as you are preparing to apply for jobs, and no doubt you will get some interviews, this question will come. You need to prepare to answer it even before you get to the interview. So always think about you, your skills, your background, as in where you're studying, what you're doing, and why you want to work there to answer this question. Then the next question that they may ask you is about your strengths. And the other one is about one of your weaknesses. When we're looking at strengths, one easy way, if you're like, oh, I don't know what my strengths are, I would recommend you take a personality test that's free. You can do that online, and it's called 16personalities.com. And you can do that. It will give you a very nice report. And one of the areas in that report is specifically about your own personality's strengths and weaknesses. What I would say is collate the strengths from that report that makes sense to you, and then choose one of the weaknesses. Normally, I see people, some people are really humble, and what they do is they will select one strength and like 4 weaknesses. And then it just looks like it doesn't look good. So I want you to do the opposite. Think about maybe 2 or 3 of your strengths and just choose one weakness, but not one that relates directly to the job. And how I explain this is this. For example, I've seen an interview once, and this was for a fast food company. I can't remember which one. This was in the US, in Texas. And one of the questions was, how do you deal with a pressure environment? Because obviously everything there's really in that shop is very fast, and people coming in all the time, and you have to be really fast. And the candidate said, I just freak out and I walk away. I can't deal with pressure. See, in that case, he didn't get the job, obviously. But in that case, if that candidate, if the question had been, tell me about one of your weaknesses, and they had said, I cannot deal with pressure, they would be out of the race to get that job, because pressure is something in a fast food industry, for example, that is a given. Like, there will be pressure. Everything needs to be fast. I mean, it's not called fast food for nothing. So when you're thinking about your weakness, choose one that is not going to affect the job you're applying for. For example, if it's a McDonald's job, for example, your weakness could be you have a bit of difficulty speaking in front of a large audience. That's fine, because you'll be dealing one-on-one with most people and with your team. It's very unlikely that you have to speak to like 30 people at the same time. So that weakness doesn't really matter for that job. So think about that when you have your test results. But all of these you prepare before the interview, okay? Technical, I mentioned a little bit. It could be, how well can you use system X, whatever the system is that they're using, or do you know how to use a coffee machine? Or there could be specific questions that are techniques and skills specifically for that types of jobs that you're applying for. The next is the behavioral one. And with behavioral questions, like these on the screen now, you need to use the STAR structure to answer them. And that means you mention S is for situation. So you mention what the situation is. You mention what the task was, which action did you take, and what was the result. Lots of people forget to mention the result. That's a problem. And lots of people don't end up not giving the context or the situation, which is also a problem. So for example, if I use the first example, tell me about a time when you had to deal with conflict. And my answer will be, well, I had to do a project for school, and it was related to, it was a research project about endangered animals in the Amazon. We were in a group of 4, and once we had finished the research, we had to present that research through PowerPoint or through do a presentation for all year 8s. So now I've given the situation and the task. My part of the project was to get all the graphics, all the pictures, and make sure that the presentation looked really good. And 2 of the other members were doing the research. Unfortunately, one of the people doing the research got really sick and couldn't do it. So on top of doing that, I was also doing the research. The result was we had to ask for an extension of about 3 days, but we still managed to do a very strong presentation, which was well, and received good feedback from the year 8s who had to vote on the best presentation. We got the 3rd of the 10 groups presented. So as you can see there, I've just invented that story, but you have the situation of what was happening, what the situation was, and be as specific as you can. You note here that I mentioned the name of the project. Sometimes people will answer these questions and they'll be very generic. So they say, there was a project we had to do, there were some people in the group. So I don't say what the project was, what the objective was, how many people were there. The more details you give, the more believable the example becomes. So it's very important that you add information so that the person can see that you're telling the truth. Behavioral questions are very common in interviews. You're probably going to have, 2 or 3 maybe, depending on what the job is. So as I mentioned, with the working under pressure one, it could be, tell me about a time when you had to work under pressure. And then you need to give that answer. It could be. Excuse me. The next one is the hypothetical one. So some examples here. What would you do if you didn't like working with one of your team members? That's a good question to go through your thinking process and what you do. The next one is, I've seen this in an interview. If you were to be sent to a desert island with someone else, who would you take with you and why? Which is interesting. Remember, with hypothetical questions, you always want to use the second conditional. So sorry, guys. And we all learned about the second conditional in our English learning classes. So if I was to be sent to a desert island, I would take my mom with me because she would continue to cook my meals for me. That's not a good answer, but it's grammatically correct. So always think about hypothetical questions. If they say, what would you do if, or if this happened, what would you do, etc. Just use the right grammar when you answer the questions. Next, we have group interviews. So group interviews are very common. Lately, it's been very common in health over the last 2 years in health hires, but also some companies that had to hire, particularly here in Adelaide, lots of IT staff because they were opening operations in South Australia. They had to hire, 100 or 200 people at a time. They did a lot of group interviews. Retail will do group interviews. Large hires like retail looking to get people in before end of the year and the holidays start. They'll be doing group interviews as well. I know that like big shops like Woolworths, Coles, etc., they'll do group interviews as well. The reasons for group interviews is, as I mentioned, the number of staff required. So if a shop suddenly needs 20 people because they know things are going to be really busy before Christmas and New Year's, they cannot afford to just interview one by one. They would prefer to have 10 people at a time, times 3 or 4 workshops, if you like. So due to time constraints and number of people, short time frame, they prefer to get a batch of people through. The other preference that some companies also do group interviews is because you can, depending on the types of group interviews, you can get people in more realistic situations than in an interview where it's just, I'm asking you a question, you're answering the questions. So I could have, people perform different tasks to see how they work together, how they work in a team. So it ends up that group interviews are more used, as I mentioned, in food services, hospitality and retail, but also even in professional jobs. I've seen an increase of that probably over the last 2 years in particular. So group interview activities and things that different companies have done and can do. They may ask a group. So let's say people may be put in groups of 4 or 5 or 6, and they will give you a topic, and they will ask you to discuss. And the topic could be something like, should we allow people to build any homes that they want, or should we continue to regulate house building and those rules related to them? And the answer doesn't matter. According to the employer, it doesn't really matter what your answer is and what you prefer. What they want to see is how you and the rest of the team, how you deal with conflicting answers. Do you go, I don't like your answer, please shut up? Or how do you listen to each other? Or do you go, oh, whatever you decide, I'm not having this discussion. Like how do you deal with that conflict of opinions? And it needs to be a unanimous decision, meaning everyone needs to agree. So then how do you present your ideas? How do you accept other people's ideas? And then how you present a united front in whatever it is that the team decided. So that's something that I've seen done a lot in group interviews. And it could happen to you as well, depending on who you interview for. The second activity or option that employers do as well are case studies. So they give you a situation to discuss through and maybe come up with some recommendations or some solutions. And that would obviously be related to the industry or the job type that you're applying for. But for example, if it was, say, in hospitality, a case study could be one of the patrons or one of the customers is unhappy about the meal. They have become aggressive. They are yelling. What would you do? And it could be, you discuss that as a team, and then you present some solutions to that or behavior. What you would do, what would you say, how would you deal with that? And the third one is actually a role play. So they could actually have someone who's unhappy about the meal or whatever, and then that person's playing that part, and then they see how you relate what you say in regards to that. But there could be, it could be a number of different things. These are the most common ones that I have seen in group interviews. Some hints and tips about how to cause a positive impression. I think when you go to a group interview, normally it is face-to-face, because they want to see how body language as well. It's harder to see on the screen. And obviously most of these jobs, all of them will be done face-to-face. They will not be done online. So that's an important trait to see. It's important to be friendly from the beginning. You don't need to be anyone's best friend in that setting, but it's important that if people greet you, you greet them back. You look people in the eye. As you're coming through, say, a reception or meeting area, you're kind to people that are around you. Active listening is also very important. If someone is talking to you, you're looking them in the eye, you're sort of going as they speak so that they know you're listening. It's important also to give others a chance. Some people think that going to a group interview, it's the person that speaks the most or the loudest that gets the job. And that's not necessarily true. In fact, it's not good to speak too much in that setting, but it's not good also to not speak at all and to just let the others talk. It's that balance between I'm listening to what other people are saying, but I also have my space to share my thoughts. And if you see someone struggling to share because no one is letting them talk, give others a chance. So go, I think Sarah wants to say something, and then, be generous in that way to let others, give others a chance to. The other one is to contribute. And contribute, you don't necessarily need to have, the newest and brightest idea, but it could be that something that someone else in your group said is really good. So you could say, oh, I think what Sarah said, it's really important to be considered because of A, B, and C, and then give your reasons for that. Body language matters. If you are, looking down, sitting with your shoulders down, looking, that's not good. You need to be, sort of facing the other people. Like if someone over there is talking, I'm looking at them, I'm looking at them, I'm looking at them according to whoever is speaking. That's very, very important. And the last one, which most people do, is once the event is over, don't leave immediately. Don't just grab everything and go because it's over. And most people will do that. You could stay back and maybe, help put the chairs back or ask another question to the people who are interviewing. That's absolutely fine to do that and cause that very strong first impression as well, or positive impression. And how do you prepare? And that's the last part of today. So if you have questions, I would, strongly encourage you to start putting them on the chat, because we do have another 8 minutes or so, and then we'll be done. For you to prepare for the interview, I would like you to review the job ad. So read through it, make a copy of it or have a copy with you. Find out what the interview type will be. Are they going to interview face-to-face, over the phone, online? Is it going to be a group of people or just you? What's the style of that interview? Because depending on how it is, you can prepare better mentally, but also know when to arrive and just have a better idea of how it's going to be. Prepare a self-introduction. Remember the question we talked about? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, that question, you need to have a self-introduction ready to go. Who are you? Why do you want to work there? Then the next one is research about the company. And I say it's not enough to do like a 2-second research on their website. Go deeper, look at their social media channels, see if they put the company name on Google or whichever program you're using, and then go news and see if there's anything about them recently in the news. If you can, and if you have those names, do some research about the interviewers as well, so that you know how high up they are in the company, but also some of their previous experience, maybe how long they've been with the company. This can help you in your interview. And finally, come up with 2 or 3 questions to ask them. It could be that at the end of the interview, the interviewers will ask you, do you have any questions for us? And most people will say, no. You want to be the person that even before you went to the interview, you wrote down 1 or 2 questions or 2 or 3 questions there. So you have something to ask. And those questions, they cannot be about you. It's always about the company. For example, if I ask the company, yes, I do have a question. You mentioned you need someone to start at 8 a.m. and finish at 6 p.m. I cannot do that. Could I start at 10 instead and finish at 8? That's about me, because it's about what I need, what I prefer, what I want to do. This is not about the company. Something about the company would be a question like, you mentioned in your website that you have a new shop opening up. Where will that shop be and when will it be open? That's about them. It's about their expansion, their plans, their future. And that question shows that not only you've done your research, but you're also interested in what's exciting to them. Because obviously for a shop or a restaurant, if they're expanding, they're excited about that. You want to show that you are too. To guess which questions you'll be asked, and you can guess probably most of them, this is what you can do or prepare to answer those questions. You'll get the job ad or the position description. Look at the criteria and what they are wanting in a candidate or in a staff member. And then think about the questions they may ask about this. So if they say, must have excellent customer service. Well, the question could be, what's your experience in customer service? And then how do you answer that? Again, you can, use your co-curricular, use your volunteering experience, use any projects you've done that relate to customer service specifically. and then you can answer that. But always work through the position description and start thinking about, okay, if they want this, what can be the question? How would I answer that? And then you practice answering those questions. So when you go to the interview, you're feeling a lot more confident because you should be able to guess at least half of the questions that are coming and have those answers ready even before you arrive at the interview, which will give you great confidence. Think about what you can show to prove what you can do. So if you have a co-curricular, or if you've done, I don't know, an art show or something, maybe you have some pictures, maybe you have the project itself, maybe you have, I don't know, that was posted on social media, I don't know. What can you show to prove what you can do? If you've done, say, some volunteering, and that's how you learn to operate a coffee machine, okay, maybe your evidence is to say, look, I've done this volunteering, the manager of the Vinny's coffee shop is happy to talk to you if you want to check my experience there. That's evidence. Another human being talking about something that you have done is evidence, and it's also a reference. So that could be one way that you show that. But certainly, you know, photos, people, or anything that you've actually made or done, that could be used as evidence to show your skills. What questions you'll be asked? For example, in this situation here, they could ask you about your availability. That's one of their requirements. They could ask you, you know, how well do you work under pressure? And give me an example of that. How, you know, you care about people and how you ensure that you exceed people's expectations. What's the answer? You think about the answer and some examples. You should probably just get 1 or 2 examples maximum for each of the questions. You don't need, you know, 10 examples. It's fine. Professional, friendly attitude, enthusiastic. So enthusiasm is all about motivation. So what motivates you? What do you want in a job? All of those questions, it's important that you prepare the answers beforehand. And great communication skills, they will see in the way that you've written your cover letter to them, but also in the way that you're presenting, they'll be able to establish that without having to ask you, you know, tell me about your communication skills. Well, they can hear, they can see. So that will not, it's unlikely that it will be a question related to that. As I mentioned before, prepare your questions. So as you're doing your research about the business, prepare your questions for them. And now it's your turn. Do we have any questions, Sarah?